Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Rory and today I want to talk to you about the top 5 mistakes that I made early on in my wedding filmmaker career. So for those of you that don't know, I run a successful production company in Tasmania, Australia, and one of my primary sources of incomes is filming weddings. I also do corporate real estate events and like interviews and legacy films and that sort of thing, but to this day still my main source of income is still weddings. There's a lot going on a wedding day. It's very run and gun. Lots of things can go wrong and there's a lot of things to think about. So jumping in as a beginner can be a very daunting prospect. So I want to go through 5 simple things that you can work on early in order to elevate your wedding films and make it so that you can charge the client more and be able to give the client a better experience and a better product at the end of the day. And ultimately that's what it's about. It's about it's a value exchange. It's about being able to provide something to the client that they're going to love forever, and you get rewarded accordingly. So number 1 on the biggest mistakes that I made early on was bad audio. Now, when I first started my career as a wedding filmmaker, I had one lav mic, and that was my audio. I also had a really bad shotgun mic that I put on the top of the camera, but I reckon the onboard audio from the camera would have been better. But I had one lav mic that I put on the groom at the start of the day, and then that was it. So for the speeches, I relied on the onboard audio from the camera. During the ceremony, I relied on the minister and the bride all being picked up on the one lav mic that was on the groom. And it was okay, but it wasn't good. The old adage is definitely very true that you can watch a bad film with great audio, but you can't watch a great film with bad audio. So definitely it's probably one of the things that you should focus on very early on in your career, making sure that the audio that you record is good, but then also making sure that the mix in the final film is good too. So knowing what levels things need to be at, knowing when you need to dip the music, knowing what sort of music you do need to use, how to denoise audio. Yeah, that's definitely number 1 mistake that I made early on. And it probably took me a good 6 months to rectify that and start getting the proper gear that I could record good audio with later on. Number 2 on the list is shooting auto. Now, I would shoot manual in terms of the shutter speed and the aperture, but I would leave my white balance on auto, and it made some really weird results. So learn your camera inside and out, learn to do full manual so you're not shooting auto white balance, because it can ruin a really good shot, especially if you're like outdoors and the sun's changing and you're getting all these blue shifts, or if you're moving around with a gimbal as you hit different sunlight, it'll actually change the color of your footage and it becomes really obvious in post and really difficult to fix if you can fix it at all. So yeah, number 2 is spend some time with your camera, learn how to shoot full manual and not have to rely on either auto white balance, auto focus, auto shutter speed, auto anything. Learn to be able to take complete control of your camera. The third mistake that I made early on was not using light correctly. That's not necessarily about bringing lights to the reception, although I do highly recommend doing that, but it's about learning how light works in relation to your camera. So sometimes what I would do early on was I would shoot with the sun coming straight at somebody. And so it would be like really flat image with no depth at all. And I wouldn't understand why one person's footage looked amazing and mine looked like rubbish. The same when I got to receptions, I wouldn't actually have any lights at all during reception. And like during the speeches, I would think, how are these really good videographers getting these amazing shots? And my shots look like crap because I'm just using the ambient light in the room, which was generally top-down orange light. But yeah, so what I did was I did a deep dive on lighting theory and I learned all about light and how to use it, making sure that I was shooting at the opposite angle to the light to make sure that you had that shadow on the face, and just using those shadows to create depth. Even in the middle of the day in direct sunlight, you can use the light to your advantage if you know how to. So I would highly recommend doing a deep dive on that to learn how to use light correctly when you're shooting on the go, and also learn how to light a reception properly. Because if you start bringing lights to your receptions when you're shooting them, it will really elevate your films and they'll look like $1 million. The fourth big mistake that I made when I was starting out as a wedding filmmaker was valuing perfection over story. Now, what that means is if I hadn't shot a shot completely perfectly, I wouldn't put it in the film. What I learned as I went on was that you're not there to create a masterpiece, you're there to capture the day, and you're there to capture the story of that day. Now, that's obviously different for different filmmakers, but for me, it was like I wanted to focus on emotion, and generally emotion happens when you least expect it. And the shots that I was getting of that emotion weren't perfect. There might be a whip pan around to see the father crying, and it might be out of focus for a little bit. But I learnt as I went on that you ended up with a better film if you included those moments, even if they maybe went in and out of focus a bit, even if there was some audio in the background that maybe you didn't want included, like if there was a song playing on the radio or something. It actually ended up making the films better by including those things because they were important to the couple. So at the end of the day, you always need to be thinking, is this important to the couple or is it just a pretty shot? If it's important to the couple, it has to go in the film, no matter what. If it's an important moment, it needs to go in there, regardless of how well you shot it, regardless of what the lighting was like, what the focus was like. Make sure you put it in because the couples are going to love it and it will make the story more authentic and more emotional. And that's the mistake that I made early on, was I was cutting those things out when I probably should have been leaving them in. And finally, the last mistake, and probably the biggest mistake as a wedding filmmaker, was undervaluing myself. And what that meant was I was charging way too little for what I was giving. I was giving people everything and charging them like $1,000, which is nothing. So as you go on and as you get bigger, you'll learn that people need to pay you for your work. You're investing a lot of money into camera equipment. You're investing a lot of time into learning this craft. And there's a ton of time on the back end with editing and stuff. And if you're charging less than like $2,000, $2,500 for a wedding, I guarantee you're losing money. I guarantee it. Unless you're shooting like 50 weddings a year, you are losing money. So the best thing that I can recommend to any beginner who's out there at the moment is if you're charging less than $2,000, add $1,000 to your price right now. Go into your like pricing document and just change it to like $2,500 instead of $1,500. I guarantee you people will still book you. If you're putting out good work and you're putting the effort into making sure that you're valuing the client's experience and you're spending time talking to them and learning about them, I guarantee you they'll still book you. The biggest mistake that I made was I was charging too little for too long, and it took too long for my business to grow. If I had have added that $1,000 on earlier, I would have been able to grow so much quicker. I would have had better equipment earlier. So I would have been able to fix things like that bad audio a lot sooner. I wouldn't have been scrimping and saving to try to buy the next audio recorder. I would have been able to buy it after the next wedding. So these things, they come around. You need to make sure that you're valuing your work and valuing yourself enough to be able to let your business grow and be able to earn more money going forwards. So yeah, guys, there you have it. They're the 5 mistakes that I can think of that I made early on in my career that definitely hindered my growth, and I wish that I had have known about before I started this journey. But I'm sure there are a lot more, but those were definitely the 5 biggest ones. If you think of any more, pop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear about them. We can workshop them if you've got any problems that you want to work on. I'm happy to try to help you with that. But yeah, I hope you guys found that useful. If you did, hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and hit the bell so you're notified on the next video. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye. Call me up before in forward motion.